Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We really appreciate you all making the time to be here today. My name is Michelle Eley, and I serve as the Community Economic Development Specialist at North Carolina A&T. But in my service role, I also co-chair the DI NACDEP committee, along with Lupe Valiterra and Lisa Hines. And so it's really been a pleasure working with Member Services Committee to host these next two sessions for this month and next month. And just really appreciate the leadership of Nicole Brazil as well as Nicole Walker, the two Nicoles, for your oversight and just making sure that we had provided time and attention to this a very important topic. As you well know, some of the work that we're going to be presenting today and next month really stems from the feedback that we got during the NACDEP New Year event. And it was clear from the conversations that we had that members of you really expressed the interest in learning more about DEI and some of the projects and programs that we're doing in our respective states, but also how we can do a better job incorporating some of those practices in our work and programs. And so, so I'm appreciative to my two colleagues, Kittrane Sanders and Dawn Burton, who they will introduce themselves in a moment, but I'm really appreciate them, and as well as Crystal Talamaka, who could not be here today due to a very important personal matter. But I just really want to say thank you, personally say thank you to them for accepting the call to be a part of the group of presenters that will be sharing content today. We're going to try to do a short tasting of lessons that we have learned and practices that we have observed as it relates to engaging others in dialogue work around race and culture. And so we hope that you enjoy what we have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Dawn and Kit, and they're going to introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to start our session. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Kittrane Sanders, and I serve as the Community and Rural and/or Morning. I serve as the Community and Rural Development Agent for North Carolina A&T State, as well as North Carolina Cooperative Extension. So I like for folks to know that we reference the Cooperative Extension as well as my funding university.
Greetings, whatever time of day it is in your world. I am Dawn Burton, and I am the Health Coordinator for Prairie View A&M University's Cooperative Extension Program. I am primarily aligned with the Family and Community Health Unit, but I do manage the health and wellness grants for family and community health. And so I'm so happy to be here with you all today. And with that, we will get this party started. I am attempting to share my screen. And so due to technology challenges, if you could just let me know if you see the introductory slide with the...
We can see that, Dawn.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we're just gonna jump into it and move on to this fun and informative meme or cartoon, to where you see two people looking at the same thing, and based on their expressions, I would almost believe that they are arguing about what they're seeing. And what we can see from our vantage point is that just because you're right doesn't mean that I'm wrong. You haven't seen life from my side. And this is such an important idea as it relates to race and culture conversations, simply because the idea is to understand and learn, and not to place blame, shame, or even attack others based on their preferences and experiences. And so what we want to start out with today is just sharing some helpful considerations and strategies when engaging in cross-race dialogues. There is never enough time to engage in a great conversation. So I encourage you to jump in and get started whenever you have the opportunity. But the first thing is really around the idea that dialogues are far more than an academic exercise. So many times when people think about becoming more proficient and knowledgeable about race and conversations that engage in race, it's a checkbox. And what we need everyone to understand is that it's not a checkbox. It's not something that you're just instantly comfortable with. And you will not always have an instantaneous solution at the end of a conversation. It's so much more than that. There's growth, there's discomfort. And so we just need to kind of shift the mindset and the thought process with that. And then also the idea that it's important to have grace and humility in these conversations, because just like the previous slide showed, we don't know what the other person's perspective, experience, and knowledge is. And so having that grace and humility within the conversations allows for listening and understanding. Dialogue should be centered on relationship building and identity matters. And what that is really alluding to is the importance of making a connection with the person that you are engaging in dialogue with. And then last but not least, progress requires growth and discomfort. Rarely do I find anyone that really likes to talk about the challenges around race and culture in these conversations with someone that they are not completely comfortable with and know. And so what that means is these conversations are uncomfortable, but through the discomfort, there is growth, there's connection, and there's understanding. And then cultural competence comes from a lifetime of learning. Again, goes back to the original point. You can't take a class and become culturally competent, because this world is so diverse and there's so many nuances to each race and ethnicity. So there needs to be a level of understanding and acceptance that it's a long journey and not a quick trip.
So we're going to talk about a few guidelines, like any meeting, when you're talking about race and culture, having those conversations, you need to ensure that you have some guidelines for the individuals that are participating. So with what Dawn just shared, we want to make sure that you try on and think about everything that's being said today. It's okay for you to disagree. Disagreement, some people shy away from it, but not feeling the same way as the other person allows for an opportunity to have some rich engagement. But one thing we want you to remember, it is not okay to blame, shame, or attack anyone. Even during that disagreement, have dialogue about it. Practice self-focus. Make sure that you're putting away all those cell phones, checking emails. We want you to be fully engaged in the next 40 minutes that you are with us. When we think about practice, notice both process and content. Content is what we say, while process is how and why we say or do something and how the group reacts. So think along those lines. Practice both and thinking. The basis of both and thinking is to allow you the opportunity to think about things to be true at the same time, that everybody has the right to their own experiences, regardless of what somebody else is experiencing. Be aware of the content and the impact. Content is what we say, so be aware of what you're saying, while process is how and why we say or do something and how the group reacts to it. Share the airtime. We know we cannot sit in this space no longer than the next 40 minutes. So allow others time to share their ideas and hold on to it, because we'll be back with you soon if you have additional questions. One person speaks at a time, so allow that opportunity so that that person can be heard. Speak for yourself and not others. Only talk about your own experiences and not experiences of others. We will seek to go back and talk about this particular one whenever you go into your breakouts, and maintain confidentiality. The same way they say what stays in Vegas stays, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. We want to ensure that what goes on in this courageous conversation room stays here in this room. So you're going to have an opportunity to go into some breakouts, but for here, we want you to know that one way we can improve our conversations and the relationships that we have with individuals is to practice self-awareness. While including noticing what we're feeling and what we're thinking at the same time, and making intentional choices about how we want to engage in difficult decisions about hard issues. We know this is a conversation that we're going to have today. And then we have Deborah Flick, a PhD, which is also the author of Debate and Dialogue, Using the Understanding Process to Transfer Conversations, suggests that moving from debate to dialogue can increase our understanding of ourselves and others while improving our communication skills and the relationships. So as you see on this particular document, when you're talking about having a conversation, when you're looking at the debate, you're looking at one right answer. That's not the case. We want you to be in the debate stage for multiple and valid perspectives, having an opportunity to hear everyone in their own voice. The goal is to be right or to persuade individuals to come your way. No, we want your goal is to just understand what's being said. Evaluating is critical, but no, we want you to be a little curious and open to what's being said this afternoon. What's wrong with this picture? Why can I learn? Listen for judgment and error when you're looking in the debate stage, but we want you to listen more than you talk. So take the opportunity to process what's being said. And then when you're in that debate stage, you plan for some type of rebuttal. You're ready just as soon as someone says something. So we want you to reflect instead of reacting. So in just a few minutes, Dawn is going to send you to a breakout room. We have 2 individuals. So I ask that you take a quick snapshot of the screen, because we are going to propose some questions. And if I can get someone to put those questions inside the chat, that will be great.
I'm adding them. I'm adding
Okay.
them as we speak.
Thank you, thank you. So we have 3 questions, yes, that we want you to think about. How does debate versus dialogue show up in our everyday lives? As well as how can debate hinder conversations related to race? And our last question, if you're able to get to it, is how can dialogue encourage conversations related to race? And again, those questions are in the chat. And just as soon as Nicole gives me the green light, we are going to send you to a breakout room for about 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So you
Okay,
see
does
3 questions.
everyone see the questions? I'm in Central Time Zone, and I've had some experiences recently where, depending on the time zone, you may or may not see the chat.
I can see it in the chat. I'll also send it as a message to everyone as
Okay.
well after I
Thank
open all
you,
the rooms.
Nicole.
Okay, I'm going to open all the rooms for 5
Okay.
minutes. We'll send you a 1-minute warning and you just have 1 minute left.
Thank you. So if you will join your rooms.
Mhm.
Nicole, I see we have 2 rooms that only have 1 person in, so can we join
Did
those
somebody,
2?
yeah, let me,
Thank
think-
you. I see Ron and
okay.
Julia. Yes, thank you. And we will see you
Not
back.
sure what happened. I think I fixed that.
Okay.
No, I still have Holly. I don't understand. I guess somebody must have just dropped off. That's
Okay.
fine. I'll add this person to the
Make
group.
a group of 3, it's fine.
Yeah,
All right, I've got 1 group of 3 now.
okay.
Okay. I think looks like we've got everybody in groups. All right, I'm going to start the 5-minute timer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Michelle.
Michelle, you're muted right now.
Thank you again. I'm so sorry. A little habit that I have, not going back to cutting myself back on once I mute myself. So in this slide, one thing that was kind of apparent when we kind of pulled this conversation is that pulling this presentation together is that when we approach conversations about race, we often grapple with the elephant in the room. as this picture depicts. And we know that when we are working on, touchy topics or highly sensitive topics, that can bring about some emotional triggers. And we know that these triggers may look very different from person to person. And so if you self-identify as a person who has privileges bestowed upon them, there are a range of emotions and responses that can come of that. So in spaces like that, it's not uncommon for people to shut down or be very cautious or to deflect. But also in contrast, when individuals who self-identify as being targeted, discriminated against, or oppressed, from the right-hand column describes a range of emotions or feelings that can come to surface for those kinds of individuals. And so in your personal experiences, you may have felt this before. If you dealt with uncomfortable topics, or if you're dealing with another person's words or their actions, or even your own behaviors. And so in these instances, these feelings or responses that I've observed has been quite normal and should be expected. And due to the fact that we are people who have been culturally socialized to act and be a certain way, we have to understand when these responses come up, that is kind of part of the territory. As Dawn has said earlier, when we embark on these conversations, when we provide these programs, we know that in some instances, some conversations may be uncomfortable. But in that, we cannot be afraid of the outcomes that we want to see in our own lives and our own thinking when it comes to having better connections with people that may be different than ourselves, having growth, and also having bridging or cultivating better understanding. And so if you ever find yourselves serving as a facilitator of this process, we always caution you to not be alarmed, not to be afraid to address the elephant in the room, but recognize that these feelings and responses may appear, but don't avoid by not talking about them or recognizing them. And even as a participant, we also caution that it's important to pay attention to when these situations and moments generate a strong emotional response, and try to approach them with curiosity and really stemming at, why do I feel the way that I feel? And hopefully you can gain more insight on why you're triggered the way, why you may have been triggered by them. And so again, like I say, it's just a great slide to kind of look at some of these things. And as we are observers of the process, is to just give space and give room, in a productive way when it does happen. Okay, next slide. So we're going to transition a bit and have another small breakout. And we would like for you to consider these two questions. We're going to also put them in the chat so you can reflect on that as well. But considering the information that we just shared in the previous slide, if you consider your own racial identity, what thoughts, feelings, or emotions have you experienced in race-based dialogues? And then number two, based on your racial identity, what strategies have you or can you use to influence your actions while moving towards sustained cross-race dialogues? So those are the kind of two questions that we have posed for you today. And we would like for you to maybe take a moment to kind of give a response with your peers in a small group discussion. And I think in this case, we're going to give you, 10 minutes if we can. Is that still the case, to do 10 minutes? Okay, that we will try to give you 10 minutes to share that information or share that feedback with one another.
And then just FYI, you're going to be in groups of 4. So it'll be a few more of you to share time and space with. I encourage you, don't hesitate, just jump into the conversation. And then we will have a few minutes for a small full group debrief after you get back. So a reminder is that this will not be, your discussion will not be recorded, and you don't have very long. So enjoy. Thank you everyone for engaging us. So this was just a tasting session. This was just a small, short, brief opportunity to engage in conversations around race. And what we would like to leave you with today are strategies for engaging in conversation around race, or dialogues around race and race-related issues. So one thing that we want to make sure that you remember as a strategy is to use guidelines. And we do have resources that can be shared with you after this session. The guidelines that we provided for you today are the ones that the Coming Together for Racial Understanding groups tends to use. I see that Michelle has entered some of the links in the chat. And understanding what your goal is to accomplish, you can tweak the guidelines for your own purposes, but understanding the guidelines and sharing the guidelines before the conversations help to mitigate any conflict and help to create a space and place for the discussion. Providing frameworks to help guide the discussion. The framework that we shared today was debate versus dialogue. It seemed like there were some really rich conversations around debate versus dialogue. And that's just one example of a framework to use. But again, helping people to be successful by creating the space and giving them the strategies to use and really think about is important. Holding the complexity and support of the both and. Remembering the both and guideline is something that's really important. If you're visual like me and you think of that first slide that showed the picture with two people looking at the 6 and a 9, it just really reinforces that both of our realities and truths can be real and accurate, even though we're seeing the same thing and differently. So just holding the space for that. Sometimes in academia, we feel like 1 + 1 is 2. And when you're doing math, there's only one answer. But understanding that in race-related conversations and dialogues, there's not always one answer. There are multiple perspectives and thought processes. And then speaking from your own racial identity and experiences, people's race, people as an individual do not represent the entire race and do not represent the entire ethnicity. They are not a monolith. There is such a wide range of perspectives and thought processes. So it's important to speak from your own personal experiences related to racial identity and experiences and try not to generalize across groups. It happens. The other thing that I want to just throw in there is that you have to give yourself grace. I talked about that earlier. We are human. We make mistakes. And in making mistakes, it's even easier to make a mistake around conversations that evoke such emotion and stress and tension. So when that happens, it's important to acknowledge that the mistake has been made, apologize, and allow for that mistake to not end the conversation, but just be a stepping stone for connection and allow the conversation to continue. And that also means if you're on the receiving end, to allow the grace to extend the acknowledgement of the mistake, and then again, continue the conversation. And then last but not least, another strategy that we used is conversating in small and large groups. Sometimes it's easier to start out talking to 1 or 2 people. If you're facilitating an effort, if you're leading a conversation, understanding the whole group coming together is not always a comfortable or an inviting environment. So you have to take it in smaller steps. And so using the small groups and then the large groups dynamic is very important. I'd like to invite my colleagues if they have anything else that they would like to share. If I've left anything out, please feel free. I'm seeing head nods. Okay, well, I'd like to celebrate the fact that number one, all of you attended today. You showed up. We hope that you found this topic and this time together beneficial. We do have the resources. I know that there are plans to move forward and do more of these type of activities. Do we have any questions or comments from anyone in the audience, in the participant?